Well, we're speaking here today as part of Politics Talk with Regina OConnor, who's a policy advisor with the ALDI political group. Regina, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us. Regina, I suppose I'd start by just putting a question to you just to describe, I suppose, the nature of your work, what your day-to-day routine looks like, and I suppose outlining where you've come from to reach the current position that you're in now.
Okay, I'm, as Killian said, a policy advisor with the ALDI group. Having come from the UEN group where Fianna Fáil were centre stage as such, with Brian Crowley as chair, I am a policy advisor on the Legal Affairs Committee, which basically means I'm advising the 84 MEPs. I sit a committee, and today actually I will be sitting a committee from 3 to about 7 o'clock, and then tomorrow all day. So what does that involve? It basically involves legislation that's coming through from the Commission, and the Parliament then designates its policy or proposals through the 20 different committees. And the cases or documents or legislative basis that come through the URI committee, which is the Legal Affairs Committee, I deal with exclusively. So today, for example, we're dealing with EU rules on possible organ transplantation. Right. We're looking at where the EU will try and support more enforcement or judgment, for example, where there's a maintenance issue with children. So where there's transnational issues, where the EU can help. Say if there's an Irish mother, German father, and the German father's absconded without any maintenance, we'll be looking at those rules today.
Very good. I mean, we were interested in speaking to Irish people working in the institutions, particularly here in the Parliament, outside of the setting of one MEP or another MEP, just to get an idea of, I suppose, an Irish perspective without the political side to it. So with that in mind, given the rejection of Lisbon 1 in 2008, and granted we had a recent approval, do you think it's undermined Irish clout, influence, or Ireland's voice in any way in the Parliament?
Well, there's two answers to that. There's the today answer, which very much we have redeemed ourselves. The Parliament, the Council, the Commission was ecstatic with the 2-1 result. But beforehand, definitely, and it was very hard to kind of capture that in writing or to explain that to the general public in Ireland. A cold wind definitely was blowing in all institutions, and that was not only the kind of heads of state level, minister level, even from an official level. You know, most people were just shocked as to why and how it could happen. And we have redeemed ourselves, definitely. And with our Irish Commissioner getting the innovation and research dossier, following on from internal market, we've certainly redeemed ourselves. Also, we have the Secretary General of the Commission, Catherine Day, an Irish lady, and the Irish have still and are doing very well. But they have redeemed themselves, there's no doubt.
And I suppose with that in mind, given we were exposed to the vagaries of the debate one way or another, do you think there's a danger that the other member states, their governments and their representative staff here in the institutions, are in a way protected from that and in a way not exposed to the fact that there's a lack of communication between citizens and what's going on here in Brussels? Yeah,
it's certainly a very good question. You found at some time we were quite frustrated, the Irish MEPs, Irish staff, at sometimes the kind of almost annihilation or bullying tactics of the other member states, but they were kindly reminded that not all of them, you know, were bringing it to their people, and it is a difficult task. And what was very interesting this time round, in Dublin particularly, a number of MEPs came over and actually understood the kind of the challenge we had, and in terms of information and how the kind of lies emerge in the void, and they certainly came back and realised, you know what, we need to be careful about trying to force any member state or trying to be bullying in terms of forcing legislation through. Definitely the list system in the cross-party or cross-nation election systems is definitely a gap. There is a gap emerging between the citizens and the MEPs and the institutions, and the EU is very aware that that gap has to be filled.
And I suppose one way of connecting a sense of identity and connectedness with what's going on here in the Parliament, for example, is with the political groups. Now, as a policy advisor with ALDI, do you think the political group system has worked in terms of creating a sense of identity of the different voices that are here in Parliament and the different groups that form those voices?
They certainly try to. There's no doubt, but it's an uphill battle. And I think also it's very important that the national delegations get back in touch with their constituents. That's where the first kind of rapport is, the natural rapport. When a constituent has a problem, they go to their national MEP. They're not thinking about, what is the policy of the socialists on, say, fur trade or something like that. I think the gap will be filled more efficiently by the national delegations. But there was an attempt to last elections to try and create some questions as to how the EPP differs from the Social and Democratic group. But I don't know how much that kind of was effective.
I mean, you've contributed to the debate in terms of communicating the work of the Parliament and of the EU generally to Irish citizens. Would you like to outline maybe the sort of central thesis of your recent work in this area?
Well, basically, it came out of my frustration at Lisbon 1 and how the lies had been so effectively swallowed by people. And I don't blame them at all, because we don't have a foundation level. So basically, it was to take the Irish through the institutions. I am their personal guide. I've worked in the council, I've worked in the commission. This is the third institution. And I'm taking them as I would a visitor group through the institutions and give them a sense of how their Team Ireland is working for them across the institutions and how they can use their MEPs. They elect their MEPs, they pay their MEPs, and they should use them more, certainly. Also an explanation of how the Lisbon Treaty, demystifying or debunking the myths that were there, and also the case of how we move forward from here, how Ireland within the EU brings Ireland back to kind of the lead player economically and in terms of research and education, etc. But also a very interesting part of it was to try and show the Boston or Berlin argument. Basically, we all sold out to Mary Harney's view that we were closer to Boston. But actually, the very first chapter takes us through the continent of Europe and how Ireland was extremely strategic and central in kind of royal courts or in prime ministers' offices or generals of armies or as entrepreneurs like our Hennessy and our Wild Geese. So it was, it brings people back to the point that we're equidistant. We are in a perfect position to use both the United States and Europe to our benefit.
Sure. And then I suppose just hitting on the point you made about our parliamentarians and using them more, do you think there is in any way a conflict for Irish parliamentarians in particular, given the way that they're elected? Do you think there's any conflict in terms of the interests they need to cater for, both at the micro level when it comes to the small constituency matters that they're asked to address on a very frequent basis, which clog up a lot of their workload, and then on the macro level where their actual job function here in Brussels and in Strasbourg is dealing with very important pieces of legislation, dealing with community-wide issues which have very little to do with the more parochial side of their job? Do you think that's some sort of an encumbrance for Irish parliamentarians, or do you think it's something which you would welcome?
It's a difficult balancing act between the two, but I think the Irish MEPs managed to do that very effectively. Like, they've one of the highest attendance rates across the countries in the European Parliament, and they also manage to get their local stuff done. There's no doubt politics is local, and that is clear if you're an Irish or a German or a Finnish MEP. That is clear. But policy side is very interesting too, but the Irish are quite clever and spreading themselves across the various committees, and then taking reports that are both from an EU perspective progressive, but also linked to the constituents at home, as to say consumer protection or the latest airline issue from Commissioner Cunova. They're clever on both. It's difficult with 12 MEPs for sure. I think the only way to do it is for them to balance it, because I think if you get carried away here, you may lose your seat.
And I suppose finally, I'll just turn to your own perspective on your working life here. I mean, what would you outline as the best and I suppose then the worst side to working here in the Parliament?
The best thing is certainly the international aspect. There's no doubt, but there's an international it's a political powerhouse here. And you can definitely, if you're quite clever and strategic as MEP and as a staff and as press, really come to the fore here. And the international aspect is great. We're moving paper here sometimes more than instead of moving tanks, and that we also have to go back to the peace project. That through interpreters and translators, all of these MEPs from 27 member states are able to communicate and to move forward. So it's certainly it's very interesting politically as a powerhouse, but also culturally, where really former wars are now been substituted by legislative peace as such. The worst thing, it's hard. Sometimes you miss Ireland. In terms of the Parliament, sometimes it can be bureaucratic, there's no doubt, but you've got to be kind of strategic and get around that.
Sure. That's great. Regina, thanks very much
You're
for
very
giving us
welcome.
your time. Wish you the best of luck with your current role.
Thank you, Killian.
Thank you.
Thank you
Cheers.
very much.